Good afternoon and welcome to the POOLBEG PHARMA PLC investor presentation. Throughout this recorded meeting, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged, can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Just click Q&A, type in your question and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question received during the meeting itself. However, the company can review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it's appropriate to do so. Before we begin, we'd like to submit the following poll. I'd now like to hand you over to Jeremy Skillington, CEO. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, good evening, almost a minute past evening. Thank you, Paul, and thank you everybody for joining us this evening for this POOLBEG presentation. I think the last day of April. Very fast start to the year as it were. You probably saw today we had a few announcements today. Obviously, our end of year results, 2023 results that we announced. We announced an option agreement with Silk Road Therapeutics. We'll talk about that later on. And then an update on our brokers, joint brokers. So busy day, busy week, busy few months for POOLBEG, but delighted to be joined somewhat virtually on stage tonight by my Chief Business Officer, David Almond, and also Dr. Tim Cote, who's co-founder and CEO of our collaborator, Silk Road Therapeutics. And what I'll do for the program of events, I'll go to give a general update on POOLBEG and our activities. I'll pass it across to Dave, who will talk through POLB 001, the lead program, and the role for cytokine release syndrome following immunotherapy administration. And then Tim will talk about Silk Road Therapeutics and their novel and interesting therapeutic for Behçet's disease. And then we'll do a wrap-up and have some questions after. So I'm thinking maybe 25, 30 minutes or so for presentations. That gives us 10, 15 minutes or so for questions at the end. So again, appreciate you for joining us this evening. So as a kickoff, just to ground us all, POOLBEG, we've had a terrific year, a terrific few years, I should say. But now we've built a fantastic team around the company. And, the team that's around us here have been successful in the past, and that's always a good ingredient for success in the future. So towards the end of last year, beginning of this year, bringing on 3 former Amryt Pharma colleagues to drive the legal aspects, business aspect, and clinical development. So again, fantastic to have them on board, fully integrated right now and driving forward our strategy as we focus some more on the orphan and rare diseases, which we'll touch upon later on. We are, following this kind of Amryt Pharma model. Some of you would have known a company co-founded by our chairman, Cathal Friel, founded in 2016. And they were acquired last year for 1.48 billion by Chiesi Pharmaceutica. So again, a very interesting model in the rare and orphan disease space. So we're putting pieces together to achieve that. And we'll talk about it later on. But partnering is very much of key focus for POOLBEG with our existing programs, but also looking externally for other programs. And I think Silk Road summarizes that very well. We'll talk about that later on. So the programs internally, touch upon later on, 001, we think is high value in the cancer immunotherapy space, treating cytokine release syndrome. We've got an oral encapsulation technology. We have an oral GLP-1 receptor agonist program going into the clinic this year. That, again, moving forward on that, a big space, big market. And of course, we've been leveraging very novel data in the infectious disease space and using artificial intelligence to identify new drug targets and new drugs for that. So we have finished last year in a very robust cash position, 12.2 million pounds at the end of the year. So that gives us a nice long runway to achieve our near and medium-term goals. And as I say, we're focused now on looking for programs to bring in to generate near medium-term revenue as well. The direction we'll take. Our pipeline, so again, those who are familiar with this in the past, we have added at the bottom here this exclusive option agreement with our friends and colleagues at Silk Road, and we'll talk about that in detail later on. Tim will give us a good run through there. But again, very excited about the potential of POLB 001 for this cytokine release syndrome. So again, we've been busy, we've been active, moving these programs forward. We've always said from a POOLBEG standpoint for these programs, we'll get early clinical data and partnered programs. And I think the getting data in multiple myeloma patients is now our goal for POLB 001. And obviously looking at getting human data later this year for the oral GLP-1 program as well. So again, a lot of progress, a lot of activity, but very excited about what the future holds. And we have been busy on the strategic collaborations front as well, partnering with a NASDAQ company, and obviously bringing in some non-dilutive funding to move forward our oral vaccine program as well. So, fantastic to push that forward. I do want to give an update again, since today was results day, just key achievements that we had from last year. And that was expanding 001 into this immuno-oncology space. Dave and the team have done an in-depth analysis that we'll talk about later on, that now we're targeting a market to the value of $10 billion. So the next generation of cancer treatments will be these immuno-oncology treatments. CRS, cytokine release syndrome, is a side effect that needs to be managed. So we see this as a whole market in itself that Dave will touch upon later on. We did garner a lot of interest from our pharma colleagues at the ASH meeting in San Diego in December. Again, when they see that we have a potential small molecule, orally administered prophylactic treatment for CRS. So that raised a lot of eyebrows for the potential there. I mentioned robust cash balance at the end of the year, 12.2 million, long runway. And again, integrating our Amrit Pharma teammates has been terrific, and they've been up to speed really, really quickly as we push things forward. I won't touch upon the other milestones. I think they're well understood, but I think that, as I said, we've had a very productive, a very active year, and again, driving value for shareholders in the pipeline products and programs we have. As I said, we're 4 months or so into 2024, and we've achieved a lot thus far. So we appreciate the momentum that we have. I want to continue that for the rest of the year. Again, announced today, we signed an options agreement with Tim and his team around the rare disease treatment. This is Topical PTX we'll touch upon. Earlier this year, too, we got positive in vivo data, I guess, validating to a certain degree the direction that we're taking in cytokine release syndrome, and the fact that POLB 001 can play a significant role in that disease. Cathal Friel stepped up to be executive chairman, and we've gotten made good progress on our intellectual property portfolio. So keen to see these move forward as well, because that protects the directions we take. So the EPO in Europe and the USPTO reviewing our patent filings and looking upon them favorably, thankfully. So other key highlights is other new patent applications have been filed, and Cathal and myself responsible for buying shares in the company directly ourselves. So again, lots done, but a lot to do, a lot to look forward with in the future. So we're well positioned to drive growth and value for POOLBEG Pharma. So what I'll do now, I'll pass it across to Dave to talk us through POLB 001. I'll step back again afterwards to talk about Behçet's and introduce Tim in greater detail, and then we'll have a wrap up at the end. So Dave, over to you.
Thanks, Jeremy. So let me just start by framing the opportunity here. So many of you recall we've covered cytokine release syndrome, but the way to think about this really, it's an unwanted side effect of the cancer immunotherapies. You do see it in infectious diseases where we still have an interest in influenza, but in the burgeoning space of cancer immunotherapy, CRS is actually the primary rate limiter when it comes to the broad, safe delivery of these amazing therapeutics that Jeremy's described that will be the future of cancer care. And it's as high as over 70% of patients actually will show CRS of grade 1, 2, 3 or above. It can be much higher than that in certain settings, and therefore it's very common. And the way to think about it, if you look at the right-hand side on the impact, even if you have grade 1 or 2, which is the lower grades of CRS, you will be hospitalized. And that's a very costly business in a transplant bed in a cancer center. So there's a practical issue there. And with CAR T, it can be grade 3 and 4, so be more serious. And actually that runs a severe sort of morbidity and mortality risk. We've estimated that just by 2030, just by managing CRS alone with the explosive growth of these therapeutics would cost directly 5.5 billion in the EU5 and the US. So there's a huge direct cost implication of managing CRS as it stands today, which is why we're excited about really trying to prevent this problem and enable these therapeutics to be more broadly safely delivered. There is a significant unmet medical need in this regard, both at a patient and center level, but at a health system level. And we're really excited about POLB 001 with the data we've generated thus far into normal volunteers. I'll recap on that in a second, and also some more recent in vivo mouse models in a CRS model, again, clearly demonstrating that we're on a good track here. The one thing I'll add before we move off this slide is sometimes molecules take a while to find the right home where the risks and the benefits are in the right place. We believe an orally delivered P38 MAP kinase inhibitor is really going to take a place in the prophylaxis or prevention of CRS in cancer immunotherapy. It's I think a strategic maneuver we've made where we're now the front runner in that regard. There is very limited development going on out there to address this issue. So POOLBEG is really excited for the future here. Let me recap really quickly. For ASH, we showed the phase 1b LPS human challenge study. The LPS is lipopolysaccharide. That's where you create an immune inflammatory response. And then we dosed the normal volunteers with POLB 001. Excellent safety, tolerability, very significant reductions in all the key inflammatory markers you would expect, IL-6, TNF-alpha, IL-10, etc. We confirmed the target inhibition, and we showed a dose-dependent reduction in those inflammatory cytokines. And the way to think about that is we're not ablating the immune system. We're just stopping the overreaction of the immune system with this asset. And then on the right-hand side of this chart, 2 points I'll make. This is the most recent data where we've in a in vivo mouse model, we've shown in a CRS model the same type of effects on pro-inflammatory cytokines, dosing POLB 001 at different levels. And actually, the important point about this more recent data is we put prophetic filings in for patents over a year ago, and now we've now filed the data to protect the asset potentially out to 2043, leveraging these data sets. So again, great progress on the clinical preclinical side. ASH, Jeremy mentioned it. I won't dwell here other than to say it's a premier conference for hematology. The data was accepted and presented in a poster presentation. We attended. We had great industry interest, and we also had scientific and investigator interest in the asset. And when we scoured the landscape at ASH, we saw very limited alternatives to proactively address this problem, which will only get more prominent as these therapeutics grow in breadth and depth across the cancer space. If we think about market opportunity here, Jeremy already alluded to this. We recollect, the monoclonal antibody space was explosive growth in its day, really bringing value to patients in a number of settings. And this is not going to be dissimilar. Predictions vary, but here we're estimating a $120 billion market by 2030. And that's on the current trajectory. That doesn't account for if there was a better enablement of the broader applications of these therapeutics outside of the cancer centers alone, where they're currently delivered. So that could be a thin end of the wedge in terms of the opportunity here that's out there as these therapeutics become the next driving force in cancer care. What I did from a market opportunity perspective was to take a conservative view. Let me describe what I mean. So I took 2 tumors alone. Why did I do that? It was because multiple myeloma and diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, which is a high-grade lymphoma, are the most prominent 2 hematological malignancies where cancer immunotherapies have made the most progress in terms of approvals. We then estimated that if all of those patients in those 2 indications were first, second, and third line were accessible. So and what you'll see actually in this space is that these therapeutics are indeed moving up the lines from third line plus into second. And I have no doubt they will get to first line, because when you have that type of survival data, that's very typical in cancer to move up the lines of therapy. We took no account of the potential expansion of the opportunity if we enabled these therapeutics to be delivered outside of a cancer center, in a smaller hospital, or as an outpatient. And therefore, we also took into account if the therapeutics were much broadly used in ALL, uveal melanomas, into solid tumors such as lung cancer and beyond, we did not calculate these into the numbers. I took a very modest view on an analog for price in this analysis, and it immediately gets us to an estimate of a 10 billion market opportunity in the EU5 and US alone. So I think this is the thin end of the wedge, as I said earlier. The other way we think about this strategically is this is not a simple supportive care strategy that you see in cancer. We believe this is a true enabler strategy. So if you envisage the 500,000 patients I described coming into the funnel at the top with myeloma and lymphoma alone, that doesn't account for the other indications. And you're trying to deliver these therapies only in cancer centers, which are limited in number and throughput. And there's an inefficiency in the system because they end up in hospital for 1, 2, sometimes 3 weeks if they get CRS, which is common. Therefore, you end up with a potential bottleneck for delivering those seamlessly to the patients who need them, depending on their accessibility to the center and the efficiency of the center. What we also modeled was, we know CRS happens. It happens over 70% of cases. And we know from a published source roughly what it costs, just direct costs only, not the indirect costs, just direct costs only. Grade 1, 2, and 3 CRS has a very significant direct cost burden on the health system. So we modeled that out. That's where we derive the 5.5 billion potential budget impact on the health systems if there is no suitable prophylaxis to prevent this problem in the future. That is not how we price drugs, but that certainly helps us to demonstrate value to payers if we can help to offset some of these incumbent costs that come with the burgeoning explosive growth of cancer immunotherapies. The other thing we've done, and we've been busy doing this because we prefer not just to think internally that we know the answers. We've really gone outside to the outside world and pressure tested our hypotheses both in the UK, in France, in Canada, and in the US with some of the top key opinion leaders. We've taken a selection of some of their comments here in the boxes in the middle of this slide, but what I'm going to focus on is just the 3 points on the right-hand side. So access to CAR T and bispecific antibody is restricted to specialist centers and limited by inpatient capacity. That is confirmed. That's what the key opinion leaders told us across the globe. Prevention of CRS would allow for outpatient administration to enable safer, broader delivery of these. So this would be an enabler or an expansive opportunity for the therapeutics to be used more broadly. And when we presented the POLB001 profile to these top experts, actually in lymphoma and myeloma, these experts work, then they said that if you hit that profile in your clinical program, that would be highly attractive to our clinical practice to increase efficiency and have these patients out of these transplant beds. So let's just listen to the confirmatory words of Dr. Martin Kaiser at the he's the head of the Royal Marsden. He was like, how do I get that to play, Jeremy? Great, thank you.
So really an oral therapy that could prevent the CRS or even just treat the CRS by the patient at home would be highly, highly beneficial to patients, healthcare systems, and really, I think, have a big impact on reach and access to such treatments.
Super. That's great. Thanks for that, Dave. Again, very insightful. I think we're very excited about the path we're on with this. I think there's something kind of unique, our discussions with pharma, the fact that I mentioned earlier on, this is orally delivered, potentially prophylactic, given before the drug is given before the immunotherapy itself, and something they can do at home. So as Dave was talking about to me, there's many advantages to this particular drug. So excited about the potential for that. But what we'll do, we'll transition. The old expression, switch gears, and we'll talk about the option deal that we signed today with Silk Road Therapeutics. So I'll start off just giving you a little bit of background into Behçet itself, but Tim is going to dig a lot deeper into this. But we see this as a very exciting rare orphan disease opportunity. And just to set the scene, Behçet's, I think, is quite interesting. There's a link. I think Tim could talk about Silk Road Therapeutics, that the prevalence of this disease is quite mixed. I mean, it's a rare and orphan, but across different countries, territories, it's quite mixed. But you can see a very high prevalence here in the likes of Turkey, and it does go along that kind of old Silk Road where the Chinese are bringing their silk back to Europe. But high, and Tim, he'll talk about it later on, ran a phase 2 trial in Turkey, and I think recruitment there would be very straightforward, which again is one of the challenges of rare and orphan diseases, finding patients. But I think having these, let's say, kind of high prevalence regions, aids and assists the execution of clinical trials. Again, Tim will talk to that. But from a Behçet standpoint, as I say, it's a debilitating disease with no cure. It causes inflammation of blood vessels and tissue. These are lifelong symptoms, so it's actually quite debilitating for the patients. It causes these oral ulcers, which you can imagine have an impact on essential functions, just like simply eating, drinking, and even speaking. So the current standard care is inadequate, and they're looking for better options, better solutions. And I think when Tim will share it, the phase 2 data is quite compelling that Tim has generated, and obviously taking that forward. So I'd say quite an interesting disease, rare and orphan. That's the direction we're taking. I think on the next slide we will look at we'll play a patient testimonial just to give you a taste or a context of the issues that the disease causes. So Paul, if you could roll that.
About 6 months after I graduated, I started to notice that I was getting recurrent mouth ulcers. So I was having severe ulceration in my mouth to the point where I couldn't eat. And I went to the GP, and he said I was run down to drink plenty of water, try and exercise, eat plenty of fruit and vegetables. I think at one point I had up to 100 mouth ulcers covering the whole of my mouth, the back of my throat, my palate. And then it just sort of progressed from there. So I became chronically fatigued. So by chronically fatigued, I mean you can't get out of bed. You can't walk a flight of stairs without sitting down.
Debilitating, and obviously solutions needed. And again, to provide more context, what Tim has developed thus far is a topical muco-adherent formulation of pentoxifylline. This topical PTX. PTX itself has been used in the past as kind of an oral, IV delivery, but for various other diseases. But Tim has identified just getting that higher doses of drug directly to the point, the pain point, part of the pun of the mouth ulcers is the way to go. And again, Tim, we'll see in the next slide, has lots of experience with rare and orphan diseases. His phase 3 trial is deemed a success. He secured orphan drug designation and indeed fast track designation from the US FDA. And he's positioning the drug as a potential for this 505(b)(2) approval pathway, which is somewhat fast tracked, is leveraging data already generated. So we've signed this 12-month option agreements. We want to complete our due diligence, understand the clinical and regulatory route that will get us as quickly as possible, as affordably as possible to the market. So a bit of work to do there, but excited to see what we've done thus far. And as I say, Tim, now I'll pass off to Tim in a second, but Tim has done tremendous work. And I think it's one of these things I will comment on. It's always great to have a collaborator who's maybe smarter than you are. Tim has a vast amount of experience in the space. And you can see here just a few bullet points. He's lived and breathed orphan drug development for many, many years, 23 years at the US Federal Service, in the FDA, the NIH, and the Center of Disease Control. And indeed, he was the director of the FDA Office of Orphan Products Development. So implemented the Orphan Drugs Act. So you couldn't ask for a better collaborator, and again, presided over decisions of 1,400 orphan drug designation applications. So, fantastic to have Tim on board to join us in this journey. But Tim, I'll pass it across to you now to talk a little bit more about the product and the program and the future.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. That's a laudatory introduction. I'm really grateful for that. It's a pleasure to be here with POOLBEG. It's nice to be with professionals who are familiar with the specialness of drug repurposing and finding ways that meet both the scientific, the regulatory, and the commercial value of bringing a new product forward for a rare disease. Silk Road Therapeutics is kind of what I did between my two consultancies, in addition to what Jeremy mentioned, I've also written more orphan designations than anybody in the world, probably about 800 at this point. But I had a non-compete after I sold the first one to IQVIA, a very large company. And that's when I spent this time working on Silk Road. So this is an accelerated 505(b)(2) regulatory pathway because it takes a product that's already approved, references all the work that's already been done that's in the FDA files, and leapfrogs over and moves it straight into this question of getting a new indication and a new formulation. So here's the high 30,000 foot perspective of it. Pentoxifylline, it's already known, it's de-risked. We know that it's not poison. We know that it's been well used in hundreds of thousands of patients, and it's got proven safety, and it was proven to have efficacy in intermittent claudication is what it's approved for in an oral format. Now, we didn't want to use an oral format because that means you take a pill, you chew it up in your stomach, your liver chews it up some more, and then you dilute it by the volume of the human body. We wanted the actual strength of the therapeutic value directly on those ulcers, those nasty lesions you saw in this woman's mouth, because we had word that there were a few cases that might actually respond to this from the medical literature. So we conducted and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the clinical trial that we did in Turkey. So we got FDA to agree that this 505(b)(2) pathway can go forward. We're pretty confident that it can be developed in a very capital efficient manner, in part because FDA said that 80% of the cases can come from Turkey. So, wow, we are really able to save a lot of costs because about 10% of the cost of the U.S. Drug development. And as I mentioned, I'm no shirk when it comes to regulatory affairs. That's where the fun is, if you ask me, for this. So let's talk a little bit about Behçet's disease. Nobody knows what caused this. Of course, it was discovered by Dr. Behçet. It might be genetic, it might be environmental, it might be infectious, some people have said, but nobody really knows what it is. But it's found along the ancient Silk Road. In fact, I don't know any other disease that's found on a particular road, but Behçet's is. It's really common in Turkey. That road runs from Istanbul all the way out to Tokyo. And Hüseyni Behçet, back in like the late 1800s, discovered that, geez, all these people are on this road. By the way, it's not just oral ulcers. It's also genital ulcers. It couldn't be bad enough. It hurts so bad. They come in crops. These people cannot eat right. They can't speak right. They can't have sex. These are all things that human beings want to do. And accordingly, people with Behçet's have very high suicide rates. It's quite awful, frankly, as a disease. Also eye effects they can have as well. So nobody knows what really causes it. Rheumatologists, dermatologists have been treating it. So we took it upon ourselves during that period of my non-compete to reformulate the product, just taking the active pharmaceutical ingredient and making it into a muco-adherent product that could be directly applied directly to the lesions in the mouth, is where we did the study. We took pictures of people as they came in, their index ulcer, their largest single ulcer, and we followed it over time, and we were able to digitalize that using computer imaging to see exactly how large those ulcers were. And I'm going to show you some data on that in just a moment. We also took pain scores and things like that along the way. Here is the money shot. This is what shows you where we really were. The picture on the left is the ulcer area. You can see that they pretty much all started at the same level at about 6 square millimeters. This is the index ulcer, the single largest ulcer at the time of entry into the trial. And over the course of 14 days, the red line dropped in size much faster than the black line. Remember, these are ulcers that by their natural history are going to come and they're going to go. They're going to come and they're going to go. This is a product which makes a substantial impact on these ulcers. Now, over on the right-hand side, you can see that we also took pain scores. That's a lot more subjective. And these people, you might say that bias could introduce into that because people knew that they were on drug or not on drug. It was not a blinded study. It was a phase 2 trial, but it was not a blinded study. But the one on the left with ulcer area, which was digitalized in a blinded fashion, you can't disagree with that. We really had a dramatic effect on these cases. This is 41 patients that were tested. Okay. Moving along, we have been to the agency a few times, had several meetings with them, had open INDs, both for the oral trial, which I just showed you the data from, and for a genital trial, which I haven't showed you data from because we haven't enrolled it. But we got orphan designation, as you would expect. It's a guy who used to sign off on them. Fast track designation, and we've agreed to multiple different things. We have concurrence on a clinical endpoint. That's the holy grail in drug development. If you can agree what it means for a drug to work, and you can define it with and come to concurrence with that with the review division, then you're golden because you both have a shared understanding of it. And we've opened INDs both for the oral and the genital activities. And I think I mentioned most of the rest of it there. Okay, so we have a industry team that's leading.
That's for me.
That's you. That's to your slide. Okay, where's that slide?
You're part of the team already, Tim. I love it.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks for that, Tim. Thanks for that overview. I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions to come, but I'll wrap up. This is my last slide. As I say, this takes us to about 30 minutes or so. But just to remind people where we stand, we've got an industry-leading team. As you say, I mean, you've just met Tim there, who will be, a collaborator as we go through this kind of option evaluation. And again, fantastic team to move the company forward. So very excited about that. Again, focusing on these kind of like late clinical kind of commercial stage. Again, Amrit to bring revenue into the company from outside products and programs. But obviously, not losing focus on our very exciting and attractive internal programs. 001 we talked about today. The oral GLP-1 we haven't, but for those who see the news of late, GLP-1s are exploding as a market standpoint. So an oral delivery of a GLP-1 agonist will be very exciting indeed. And as I said, that'll be in the clinic this year as a proof of concept clinical trial. And then with our AI discoveries, where we're talking to collaborators around driving that program forward. So again, a healthy cash balance, and the focus is near-term revenue generation and profitability. As I say, I think we're in a very strong position. We've worked, as a team, very hard, very focused over the last, almost 3 years it is now. But as I say, a lot of the road is traveled, but a long way to go. But a very exciting journey. Again, appreciate the investors that have come along for that journey. So what we'll do now, we'll take a pause. Maybe we'll get Tim and Dave back on, and then we'll have some questions have come in, and I'll go through these questions and delegate as best I can. As I say, it's nice to have Dave and Tim to share the stage to answer the questions directly. So let me start. I'll take just stick this on. I'll take the first one from Nathan. Thank you, Nathan. Is there a cost for the option for the Behçet's asset, and how much will be required to allow commercialization of the asset? The short answer is yes. I think we talked about it was a modest payment to get to lock in the option. And I think that then gives us the time to spend, again, talking to Tim, talking to his team, talking to the FDA about what that clinical path, what that regulatory path looks like. And then, of course, we can kind of cost it up from there. But as Tim said, the option to run this in Turkey for essentially what's 10% the cost of running clinical trials in the US is, of course, very attractive, and the FDA will recognize that. So I think that's there's many points about this asset, about this collaboration that are attractive, and certainly that's something. I think there's a clear regulatory path ahead of us here. And again, as I say, with Tim as a collaborator, I think that bodes well, because he's seen and done it from an FDA standpoint, certainly in the orphan standpoint. Second question, Nathan's hogging all the questions. What kind of a deal are we looking to structure for POLB 001? An outright sale, an upfront, and milestones? And maybe Dave, if you want to take a crack at that, I can weigh in as well.
Yeah, so I mean, we're not fixated on a certain deal structure, but I think the most likely scenario is where we would take some form of investment to accelerate the phase 2A study. We have designs. We have investigators. We're good to go, and if we get support to accelerate that investment, then there would be potential optionality in a positive readout scenario from a licensing perspective. That's a broad level description. Jeremy, I don't know if you'd add anything to that.
Yeah, no, I think the flexibility is the key point there, and I will say our discussions with pharma, they're aligned as well. I mean, they see this as certainly for CRS. And I like to give the example of, what the current standard of treatment is, an antibody against interleukin-6 receptor. This is a Roche drug. But anybody who's in the the bispecific or CAR T space is using Roche's drug as like supportive care. So Roche initially got it indicated, so you got it on the market for rheumatoid arthritis, but now it's been used for this. So I think our discussions with pharma, they see that it'll benefit the drugs that they have themselves in their pipeline, but it could be potentially used broader. So I think they will be looking for that kind of broader structure of a deal that they'll take control, they'll take ownership of. And I think we're happy with that. Again, the POOLBEG development or business strategy has always been to to partner with pharma, and then they'll take it forward into the later stages, phase 2, phase 3s, and commercialization. So we're flexible, but I think there's a clear path there. Thanks for that, Dave. A question from Mark S. Could POLB 001 be useful for intermittently flaring, relapsing autoimmune inflammatory conditions like psoriasis? Again, a really good question. And there's a little bit of maybe a history kind of lesson here with regard to P38 MAP kinase. Pharma, they always look for new and novel targets. And I think maybe 12, 15 years ago, P38 MAP kinase, popped up or cropped up as a key regulator of that immune inflammatory response. So a lot of pharma companies went after P38 MAP kinase, developing inhibitors of this. But what they realized was that even though the drugs they had were, successful in, finding and blocking the target, what they realized was for these chronic indications, these chronic diseases, that, if you're on drug for 6, 9, 12 months, that the body, or in particular the liver, didn't like the drug being around. So a lot of pharma then, when it wasn't going to be their obvious, blockbuster for, rheumatoid arthritis or asthma, they kind of moved on to a new target. So Dave mentioned earlier on about, here's a drug and it's kind of like it's searching or looking for its ideal disease. And I think for us, we've kind of, I won't say stumbled across CRS, but CRS wasn't an issue, 10, 12 years ago when these drugs have been developed, but now with these cancer immunotherapies, it's moving through. So, I mean, the bottom line there is that it could potentially be effective, but we don't have that toxicology coverage for a long-term chronic disease such as psoriasis. What we're looking at is these kind of short inflammatory, these acute inflammatory conditions where you're on drug for maybe, 2 weeks or 3 weeks, even 4, but nothing more. It's just our tox coverage goes out to 3 months and they're beyond it. So, but it's a good question. It's one of these things that it could work in that area, but not our drug given the, the work that's been done thus far. But again, Mark, really good question in that regard. Question here from Martin: how involved will Tim be going forward? I think
as involved as they can be.
That's a good way to answer, Tim. Is because I think we kind of indicated this is this is Tim's baby, as it were, and obviously he's brought this forward a long way. Wants to see it get to the the finish line, as it were. And I think we know his knowledge and expertise can be a benefit to POOLBEG. So I think it's a nice kind of matchup of his expertise and our desire to move in that rare and orphan disease setting. So I like that answer, Tim. Very good. Let's see here. Claire asked a question: keen to understand how many such agreements and options on exciting products for clinical unmet need that POOLBEG can identify and manage. Good question. Can you perhaps talk us through how you go through that process? Dave, do you want to talk about that? Did you get the question? How many such agreements and options on exciting products for clinical unmet need that POOLBEG can identify and manage? I guess our process, our search and evaluation process for these rare and orphan diseases.
Yeah, so we start with in the funnel, we start with a lot of opportunities. And we have an in-house capability with the team to distill those because for one reason or another, they may or may not be attractive either strategically or for some other reason. And so what comes out the end of the funnel once we scour the landscape are fewer alternatives that really are a fit. And in answer to your question is, I mean, there's always a question around capacity in these situations, but don't forget we run a very lean structure and we can manage multiple opportunities because we are, we can outsource some of the clinical work as necessary with CRO support. We can use flexible resources if we have to. These are not as intensive as having, fully blown commercial assets, which we will get to. So I think we can manage a good number of them on the lean basis that we've shown. We you know, it was 3 years since IPO. We've been burning through that cash very slowly because we use it very judiciously on opportunities that really fit. And with the team, we have the bandwidth to manage several of these at a time. I will add, though, that we have prioritized we have a longer list of opportunities within the company. What you're seeing today are our top priorities and a new partnership. When we go commercial at some point, the other beauty of orphan diseases are not only serious, rare, debilitating diseases with high unmet medical need, they're also typically highly concentrated and reachable for a small company because they tend to be managed by major centers. So you don't then have to deploy huge divisions in the old traditional pharma model. You can deploy very lean teams who can manage more, a number of leveraged assets in that space, which is also highly attractive from a P&L and contribution perspective.
Well summarized, Dave. Thanks for that. Tim, a couple of questions for you. Well, A and B from John. Why is topical formulation better than oral formulation? And then the follow-up is, what are the benefits of FDA orphan and fast track designation? This is right in your wheelhouse.
Sure. So topical is better because there's more of it where you need it. You can expect that at the ulcers, there would be logs and logs and logs higher concentration than if you're diluting it by the volume of the human body. That's the main reason. It's really a pharmacokinetic kind of exercise. You're getting exactly the drug right where you need it, where it's going to affect the underlying vasculature right there. Orphan designation, there are 4 things in the law. You get orphan exclusivity, means you get to choose your price. You're the only one who's selling it. Intentionally, orphan drugs are eye-poppingly expensive sometimes. I mean, $100,000 per patient per year is not uncommon. And that's by design. It creates an incentive for the creation of new products for people with rare diseases, which people normally wouldn't want to do. There's fee exemptions. You don't have to pay the FDA $3.5 million to evaluate your product. There's tax credits if you're doing trials in the United States, and you're exempted from some onerous pediatric rules. Those are the things that are in the law. But what's not in the law, but it's clear, it's part of the reality, is orphans are smaller, they are cheaper, they are faster, and there are fewer clinical trials as you go forward. So all of those things together has led to a situation today where 65% of everything FDA is approving is an orphan drug.
Interesting stat. That's wonderful, Tim. Thanks for that summary. Appreciate that. Question here again. Nathan's coming in. I'll kind of answer this. How many total patients needs to be the FDA approved next study for Silk Road asset? I think the best way to answer that is that's what our diligence will tell us. And I think that's why we're going to take that time to nail that down, because then that helps us, identify clinical trial sites, what the cost will be, and moving on from that. And I think the following question from Nathan is expected time needed for due diligence. The option is a 12-month period, but again, those who know POOLBEG know that we move rapidly, we move quickly. I think that gives us kind of sufficient time to get it done. So, we want to move forward quickly with this because, again, excited about the data that's already been generated, and obviously want to move it, forward rapidly from here. And the last, I was going to say question, but it seems more like a comment. Good to see Cathal couldn't resist being more involved. What is he bringing into the position of POOLBEG strategy? Those who know Cathal knows he brings lots of different ideas, lots of different angles. I think he's, brings obviously a lot of his own kind of expertise and knowledge. But he's always been very much involved, and it's great to have him in as that, as they say, that kind of formal kind of executive chairmanship role. Cathal is in the office every day, so it's not. I don't think there'll be that dramatic a change. He's always been very active and very much involved, and very good. There was that last question about the due diligence, and I think, let me see if there's any more coming in. Last question, I think, given our timeline, does the announcements of a joint broker indicate we may need a capital raise, or is it more for corporate action like reversing into NASDAQ target? Yeah, we've mentioned that before. I do think Shore Capital, we talked earlier on about, not essentially replicating the Amrit story, but sure, we're involved in Amrit, and the team here at Poolbeg have worked with them before, so they're very familiar with them. But we have stated that kind of ultimate objective of getting onto NASDAQ. We got to build the company appropriately with that. But I won't say it's direct, but it's, as I say, they're very familiar with the Amrit story. So it's again a little bit of kind of symbiosis, I guess, between our understandings and their understandings. But so we'll wrap it up there. Again, I think we're bang on time. I do want to again appreciate and thank Dave and Tim for joining this evening. I thought it was very informative. Again, Tim, really appreciate going through the Silk Road story and the background to Behçet's and awful disease. But hopefully we're in a position to bring some treatment and therapies to patients that need it most. And lastly, I just want to thank all the attendees this evening. If there's any kind of questions I missed, obviously we do a follow-up as well. But appreciate your time this evening. I know some of you are probably rushing off to see Champions League semi-finals or indeed top of the table clash in the championship. But hope you have a good evening, and we look forward to giving you further updates for Poolbeg in the not too distant future. Thank you all.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Jeremy, David, Tim, thank you indeed for updating investors today. And as Jeremy said, of course, any further questions, the team will be able to review those. Can I please ask investors not to close the sessions? You now automatically be redirected to provide your feedback in order the team can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete and is greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team, Poolbeg Pharma PLC, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation, and good evening to you all.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you.